With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome back to the World Today. That was a very, very good protagonist. Great panel, Oliver, Kim and Frank. And Frank keeps promising he'll take us for a trip on one of his yachts. I think Israel at the moment have two of them. You have to buy another one, mate. But I'll be there, and the skipper too. As of early 2026, the UK government is in the process of finalising a new non-statutory definition of anti-Muslim hatred, Islamophobia, following a significant rise in reported incidents. The new Labor government, the ALP, the Australian one, the Starmer's mob, launched a working group in March 2025 to develop this definition, aiming to bring previous divides over free speech and the 2019 definition to provide a definition reflective of a wide range of perspectives and priorities for British Muslims. A draft definition has been produced. Now, this draft includes acts of violence, harassment and intimidation directed at Muslims or those perceived as such. Prejudicial, stereotyping and radicalisation of Muslims, discriminatory actions within institutions and focus on free speech. The government has emphasised that any adopted definition must not infringe on the right to criticise religion. The proposed wording aims to protect individuals from hatred while allowing for debate. Now, our guest is a repeat guest, and I'm very happy to have him back. A very stand-up gentleman. Our guest is Mohammed Amin, MBE. Now, he's the Muslim co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester. Mohammed, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Mike.
How are you?
Very well.
We've just lost you again. There you are. A button's being pushed everywhere in the background. What's your views? Can you summarise, first of all, and I'll get your views on it, how hate speech is dealt with in the UK and the UK law?
Well, the UK, like all European countries, with the exception of, I think, Russia and Belarus, is a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights, which sets out the freedom of speech in European law. And states are allowed to have some limitations on freedom of speech. You can't go around saying that Mohammed Amin should be attacked and killed, for example, because that would be inciting violence against me. But in general, the UK believes in freedom of speech. At the same time, there is really bad behavior that goes on in terms of encouraging hatred against groups. The most important point is that that is frowned upon. It's not necessarily illegal, and the government, I don't think, is planning to make it illegal to say bad things about Muslims, to denigrate them. But however, it does want something to provide guidance for itself and for other bodies that voluntarily choose to adopt this definition, because it won't be legally binding, to say what is unacceptable bad behavior. But I don't think nobody is calling for criminalization of saying, first of all, bad things about Islam. We have total freedom to criticize all religions in the UK and will continue to have. But if you want to denigrate Muslims, to incite hatred of Muslims, the government is going to decide that you're not the kind of guy that we want to do business with.
Could you tell me what the current penalties for hate crime are at the moment?
We have the law in the UK criminalizes actual behaviors. So if you attack somebody, it's assault. We have legislation that since about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, maybe even longer, has said that if you attack somebody because they were black, that will be treated as an aggravating factor when deciding what sentence we give you. So if you might have been locked up for 3 months otherwise, we might well lock you up for 12 months because you did it specifically on racial grounds. There is also a similar aggravating factor for religion, although that religion factor can't be invoked without the express approval of the Attorney General, because it's intended to ensure that freedom of speech is preserved. So incitement to racial hatred, where you incite somebody very explicitly to hate a racial group, going beyond the boundary of just sort of discourse, but actually active hatred, again, is potentially criminal. There's an incitement to religious hatred offence, which again was put on the statute, but this one I think was 2006, but again can't be invoked without the approval of the Attorney General to preserve, and it makes it quite clear that criticising religion is fine.
Look, there was a previous definition of Islamophobia. What was wrong with that?
Right. This is a story that I've been talking about and writing about since the mid-2000s. I wrote my first piece in 2012. The modern history of the word Islamophobia starts in 1997 with a report that was written by about 25 academics, mostly Muslims, but from memory, I think not all of them were Muslims. And it was funded and published by the Runnymede Trust, which is a charity, but the work was done by the people on the working party. The Runnymede Trust simply paid for it and published it. And that report, frankly, was a bit like a camel, a horse designed by committee. I'm sure if any one of those 24 or 25 people had written a report, we would have had a much better report than what the committee actually produced. It didn't even contain an express definition. There wasn't a paragraph or a page you could go to which said, this is our definition of Islamophobia, but it made clear that it regarded Islamophobia as a particular kind of attitude towards Islam, and then it spent a lot of pages expanding on what it meant by that. And as a consequence, we had really good people in our society, like the Guardian journalist Polly Toynbee, for example, who nobody would consider to be a bad person, saying, I am proud to be an Islamophobe. And she was saying that as a way of criticizing this awful, muddled definition and confusion between hostility to Muslims and criticism of Islam. And that definition from 1997 struggled on for years, being criticized. In 2017, 20 years later, the Runnymede Trust paid for another working party to publish a new updated definition, which was actually quite a lot better in many ways, and we can discuss it if you want. But nevertheless, once you've had something around for more than 20 years, everybody assumes that is the definition of Islamophobia and trying to fix it by saying, no, we have a new definition, the 2017 definition. I'm not using the 1997 definition. You're on a loser. The 2017 definition didn't take off. Then in 2019, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims, which is a bipartisan, in fact, it's an all-party group inside the British Parliament, including members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, they published a report with a new definition of Islamophobia, the 2019 definition, which caught on in one sense. It's been adopted by a lot of organizations. The Labour Party adopted it. Even my own party, the Liberal Democrats, adopted it, although before I became a member, otherwise I would have spoken against it. The Conservative Party never adopted it, and the Conservative government never adopted it. And it's also been criticized. It's actually not a bad definition, except it uses the word racism. And it uses the word racism in a way that makes sense to academics, but doesn't make sense to the man in the street. Because the one thing that the man in the street knows about Muslims, even if they know nothing else about Muslims, is that Muslims are not a race. But to an academic, racism isn't about finding ethnic groups or looking at your DNA. Racism is a process whereby you take some kind of outgroup, you sort of define them in a way, you then start treating them badly. At the most extreme, you send that outgroup to a concentration camp, and that's racism. And when I criticized that definition, I gave an example on my website. I'm a chess player. I like playing chess. Chess players are a group. You can define them. They all play chess. So if somebody started saying we should actually sack chess players and refuse to employ them in any public sector organization, maybe we should actually put an extra tax on chess players, maybe we should send chess players to concentration camps, that would be racism against chess players. But the man in the street would say, this is nonsense. Chess players are not a race. Chess players are no more a race than are Muslims a race. So don't use the word racism. That's the big flaw in the 2019 definition. Otherwise, it's not bad.
Yeah, it's a. Can I ask? Is there an increase? I mean, it says here there's an increase of 43% in anti-Muslim incidents. That was in 2024, and I would imagine it wouldn't have changed much last year either. How do we? Because to me, the conversation and the last conversation we had with others, there seems to be a real lack of knowledge, or ignorance is just running amok. How do we stop? Because first of all, to throw laws up that you can't say, can't do, can't whatever. Surely the education, and to say that the Muslim community are just like any other community. You got, whether people are from Botswana, or whether they're Christians, or whether they're from China. They're a community, and they deserve the same amount of respect, and I suppose and criticism as anybody else. No one's any different. So, do you think that even though we're bringing in, and we're doing the same we have done the same in Australia, and it works, in many ways, but to me it seems there's a lot of ignorance. Ignorance portrayed by legacy media, by independent media, and they push their points, and at the end you got this blurred gabble. Just no one knows which end is up. Do you think the ignorance part, or the lack of knowledge, is part of the reason why there's a lot of intolerance? And not just, by the way, not just to Muslims, other groups, they are also attacked under. But I understand that the Muslim community is under a fair amount of fire. Do you think education is better than punishment?
Education is definitely always better than punishment. But let's be honest. Part of it is people have an agenda to promote their political causes, or sometimes even their economic causes. Let's take an illustrative example. A community I know extremely well, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. If newspapers never published any good news about what Mormons were doing, but every time a Mormon ran a traffic light, or got into a fight, or murdered somebody, because Mormons are human beings, they do all kinds of things, or committed a fraud, every time a Mormon did something bad, it was splashed all over the newspapers. But every time Mormons did anything good, it would be ignored. Quite soon, people's attitudes towards Mormons would start to change. And that, unfortunately, has happened with Muslims. Now, in the case of Muslims, unlike Mormons, we have had terrible things done by Muslims. I live in the UK. I remember the London bombings of the 7th of July 2005, when I think it was 54 people were killed in buses and on the London Underground. I remember the terrorist. My home city is Manchester, and 22 people were killed in Manchester Arena by a Muslim who was a suicide bomber. So bad things have been done by Muslims, and nobody's trying to deny that. But if you only focus on the bad things done by Muslims, ignore all the good things done by Muslims, then you will promote a very distorted view. And unfortunately, large parts of the British media, not all of them, my favorite newspaper, the Financial Times, never behaves that way, but some parts of the British media do set out to promote bad news about Muslims and ignore good news about Muslims.
Yep, I totally agree there. I just because the Australia is no different than the UK. We're going through all sorts of upheaval, new laws to protect the Jewish community, because there's an oversupply of anti-Semitic conversations and some bad conversations. I think the problem we start to have, if we start having laws for what we can say, and so therefore you can't criticise. I mean, in Australia, the perception is that if you criticise the Israeli government, not the Jewish people, but the Israeli government, Netanyahu and stuff, you could stand the chance of having a knock on the door and a visit down to the police station, and that's wrong. And so, but what we have is all these laws come in, and I understand why people think I sort of understand why they think they need to have these laws or this anti-hate speech. But in doing so, one, you create a very, very bad feeling out there, because you can't talk about things that you want to talk about. Do you think that these new laws are eroding? I do. But do you think they're eroding free speech? Because free speech really is free speech. It's not what, in for example, New South Wales in Australia, the Premier there, Chris Minns, has said that your free speech is what this government will afford you. So you can't say what we don't want you to say. And that sort of thing really scares me, because all of a sudden you have what is meant to be good and to do good goes overboard. And sure, you might have a particular government or a administration who bring out particular laws, but when you bring in other administrations, they can misuse what is meant to be a good thing in the first place. What do you think about that?
These are really difficult. I believe in the freedom of speech. I've read the American Constitution, although I'm not convinced that I would necessarily want to have everything set out exactly the way they have in the US Bill of Rights on things like, certainly not on gun rights, but even the question of freedom of speech. It's a really difficult question. I strongly believe in freedom of speech. Equally, I would feel really, really uncomfortable, and possibly stronger than uncomfortable. Suppose somebody started saying, again, let's pick on Mormons, that Mormons are such really bad people, they're subhuman, and we should put them into concentration camps. Maybe we should collectively as a society decide to exterminate them. But I'm not provoking violence against any individual Mormon by name. It's the whole community. I want all Mormons to be rounded up and sent to gas chambers. Should I be allowed to do that? You tell me.
Of course not. And that's the uncomfortable issue we face, isn't it? And hurty words, I think are, they're just words. However, because I said to a friend of mine once, who does my hair, better see him next week. I'm starting to look like a sheepdog. But he, and I said something about, and he's gay, and I said I don't understand why you have these people have these opinions, and because to me we're all equal. I don't care at all about someone, whatever they are, whether their sexuality or whether their religion. I don't care. I just do not care if you're a good person. But he said to me, and brought home some realizations. He said to me, unless you've been in that situation, unless you're living that situation, and you see the backlash from people around you and stuff, and you just feel it, so you can't appreciate it. And I think then I move that across to those that have religious persecution or their hate speech towards particular societies, and I thought, I can understand that. But I have this quandary that once you start eroding free speech and what you can't and can say, and to be able to criticise a foreign government and to say that they have done bad things, which they have admitted to have that threat of being locked up in jail for many years is wrong. And that's where the clash of free speech or selective speech.
I agree with you. And so, because these are really difficult issues where drawing the line is so challenging, what it calls for is not rushing, delay, a national conversation, but collectively we should be able to come up and decide some boundaries, which allows you to, for example, say anything you want about otherwise of my religion, while at the same time stopping you wanting to send all Muslims to gas chambers. Somewhere we have to find that line, but we have to find it collectively without a rush.
Yeah, totally agree. We have run out of time. This is just, this could be such a great long form interview, and I'd like to probably take you up on the one just down the track a bit. Mohammed, it's been a pleasure and always is a pleasure. If somebody wants to find out more about what you do and your organisations, how do we do that?
We have a website, muslimjewish.org.uk. But even if you forget our URL, if you just Google the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester, you'll find us instantly.
Mohammed Amin, MBE, Muslim co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester. Thank you so much for your time. This is The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share the results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
Makers are facing more travel.
When we're on the go, it's easy to go into our own world. Keep your mind on the road.
Our beautiful world is changing, withering, dying by the hands of those who don't value nature, even though we all depend on it for life itself. But there is hope. Together with caring friends, the Nature Conservancy can restore our lands, heal our waters, and save our wildlife with big solutions only nature can provide. But every day we lose more of the places we love, and we urgently need to save endangered lands, waters, and wild species. The actions we take today will determine the tomorrow we leave to our children and grandchildren. The water they drink, the air they breathe, the beauty they experience. To learn more about how you can help protect and conserve our beautiful world, visit nature.org today.
Asthma is a growing problem, especially among children. Asthma affects the quality of life for millions like me every single day. My name is Chris Draft, and I have asthma. And I've spent more than a decade in the NFL tackling asthma on and off the field. Join me in the EPA in helping people control their asthma. Asthma is a lung condition that can be controlled through medication and by avoiding things that can make it worse. 3 steps are the solution to controlling asthma. Step 1, talk to a doctor. Step 2, make a plan. And step 3, get rid of things that can make it worse. Asthma can be tackled. For more information on asthma, log on to epa.gov/asthma.
We're today's News Talk, the world today.
And back to to our next guest here on The World Today. Great conversation with Mohammed too. Very interesting, and I think it's a it is very complex. But I think free speech is free speech, isn't it? Really. But then you run into all sorts of complications, such as Epstein. The recent Epstein document drop it's exploded in Britain. This time, it's not a royal family member under scrutiny. He still is. Did you see the photos of him? Oh, my Lord. Anyway, it's the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and his previously appointed ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson. Now, Mandelson is also accused not only with consorting with Epstein, but with leaking sensitive government information to him. I wonder what he had on him. Anyway. Is he alive, Epstein? We should ask our next guest if he thinks he's still alive. Some say he is. Mandelson has resigned from the House of Lords, but London's Met Police, hello, launched an investigation into Mandelson for misconduct in public office based on, I think it was in 2009, the emails he forwarded to Epstein. The files also mentioned $75,000 in payments to Mandelson or his husband in 2003, 2004, which he says he can't recall. I've forgotten all about that bit. It's a really, if you think about it, it's a heady scandal, isn't it? But there's not much, but there is much not being discussed by the media and the UK and the US for that matter. I mean, you wonder if there are some that are sort of protected, like Lord Mandelson, for example. And if you look at the police, I think in the Met Police in 2023, I think it was, or 24, they had a magnificent record. They solved, the crimes they didn't solve. I think it was about 87 or 94%. So one wonders what the hell will happen. Will they get around to saying hello, or will it just go under the carpet? My guess is Tony Gosling, a freelance journo. Tony, thanks for joining us. What's your views on Mandelson? Do you think he'll get his comeuppance, or do you think maybe the Met Police doing their, their usual job of late, can't solve a crime, and or we'll just let him disappear because he's a lord.
Look, before we talk about Mandelson, I just want to say something a bit about free speech because because when I first started in journalism in the late 1980s, we had I'm from mass media, and we had millions of listeners, and we had to make sure we were a radio station in London, BBC station for London, and just had to make sure really that we knew what we were doing. So when it comes to free speech, there are a few basic rules. Number one is that you separate fact from speculation. And this, of course, is really about you as a journalist and credibility. It's not necessarily going to get you locked up to speculate or when you should be talking about facts or the other way around. But there's a couple of main reasons why you don't really have total free speech. A lot of that is to do with what journalism is really about, which we seem to have mainly forgotten. And one of those is when you're inciting crime. You can't incite crime. And the other is when you're reporting on court cases, you can't attempt to influence a jury during an active case. So there are some basic limits on it, So I just think we've lost, a lot of our journalism has lost that, and all the alternative media, a lot of them has lost it. But anyway, look, on to
Stop. Just before you go any, sorry, I don't mean to butt in, but I did, and I apologise.
That's free speech.
But here's the thing. Well, I'm talking about everyday speech, people on the street and stuff. And you are dead right when it comes to journalism. And I was having a real whinge, which is part of my makeup, apparently, I believe. I just whinge a lot. But we always hear citizen journalist, that's a journalist. I've got a camera, I've got a phone, I'm filming, I'm a journalist. No. They're not journalists. They're people with a camera or have know how to work the computer, and they're having an opinion. But it doesn't make them a journalist, because journalism, I worked for newspapers and radio stations in journalism. I did a couple of years and got bored with it, so I just went out straight into it. But you have these rules and regulations, and they're there not to make your life miserable. They're there to make sure that you report generally the news. So that part I understand. However, having said that, if you look at legacy media, and they are knocked on the head many, many times, and journalists these days are taught to have an opinion in that story, which is bizarre. I was always taught, tell it as it is, but no, you have to have an opinion in that. So therefore, the journalism becomes tainted, and you get a sway either way. Legacy media's problem is that they sway towards government or the non-popular view. Independent media, they're all over the shop because they're not journalists. So that's the only point I was making.
Well, actually, no. Look, there are quite a lot of independent. I would include myself as alternative media that are journalists, and so I think there's good and bad mainstream press, and there's also good and bad alternative, and it's really up to the viewers and the listeners and the readers to figure it out. Back in the day, it was a professional business where people would progress through their career largely because they were good at what they were doing. Nowadays, it seems to me they progress through their career if they say what they are supposed to say. And one of those things you're supposed to say is nothing whatsoever about elite power structures and corruption, such as Peter Mandelson.
Sorry, you're dropping out. Sorry.
So elite power structures such as Peter Mandelson, you don't talk about.
Of course.
And if you get to that, then you'll progress through the system. So the other thing I suppose we could mention is things like the Official Secrets Act here. If you're in knowledge of confidential military stuff or whatever, then you're not allowed to talk about it. If you do, they'll arrest you and jail you. So there are some restrictions on it, but free speech at least is out there still just about online. But I think it's being kind of crowded out by a lot of fake alternative media.
And I totally agree, and it's interesting. We have our fingers crossed for a resurgence, but we would not follow an agenda. Yet, you have to ask yourself whether independent media is, in many ways, can be worse than legacy. At least legacy, you got an idea where who's signing the checks and which side of the bed they're sleeping on. But if you look at legacy media, they could say independent media or alt media. You have to ask yourself, who's paying their bills, and what do they require from them to have your bills paid so that you can eat and have a roof over your head? What do you have to do for it? How do you have to sing for your supper? So I think it's become so murky these days. But what and I agree that what we say on air or write is very important, and we need to stick to standards. But at the same time, it doesn't mean covering up all the BS that is going on out there and covering up, as you mentioned, Lord Mandelson.
Yeah, can we talk about him? Because I can remember very well working in the London press and drinking in the evenings and stuff, and hearing all sorts of things from other journalists about Mandelson. This is in the late 80s, early 90s, and certainly once this is even before the Labour Party got elected under Tony Blair. He was known as somebody who would be very threatening to journalists. So he would say, well, if you print that, I will get you sacked. And it was known amongst journalists that this would happen. So someone would say, well, you can't do that, think to themselves. And then suddenly the next week they'd find themselves out of a job, because he had connections in the city who would then lean on managers, media managers, maybe not quite within the BBC was a bit more difficult to do that, but certainly within the private press, things like the Daily Telegraph, the Murdoch Empire, Sky, as it was back in those days. And people would be just out of a job the next week. He had those sorts of connections, and that's why he was known, I think, by journalists initially, but then by the rest of the country as the Prince of Darkness. So this has been going on for decades, and it's just that nobody's been in the position, as Donald Trump has done, to release enough dirt on Mandelson to get him kicked out. I mean, obviously he was a politician in the 90s, and he's now in a very powerful position, along with Tony Blair, in the the top of the Labour Party. Although he's not got such an important official position, it's known that Mandelson and Blair are really leading the party in many ways. So, and the other thing to understand about all of this is the big problem for Mandelson and Starmer is the appointment of Mandelson as ambassador to the United States. I mean, he's not from the diplomatic service. He has no kind of proper. He's not going up through a proper career path. He's just being cherry picked, almost like you could pick a random person on the streets of Adelaide or somewhere and make them American ambassador to America. He's just been selected against the advice of the security services, we hear. And that was a decision made not by Starmer, because Starmer doesn't make decisions. This was pushed on Starmer, apparently, so we're hearing, by Morgan McSweeney, who's the chief of staff to Keir Starmer. So as we can now see, really, I think that Starmer is really just there as a spokesperson, as a figurehead, but he may be brought down by this, or possibly Morgan McSweeney might be. I don't know if you've read the book. In a way, what's happening to Mandelson and Starmer at the moment is a double whammy, because Paul Holden brought out, an excellent London journalist, brought out a book called The Fraud at the tail end of last year. It was, I think, for many, the smartest in the UK, scrutinising corruption. The Fraud by Paul Holden was a massively important book, and it explained how £700,000 slush fund was created in order to, between 2017 and 2020, to kick out Corbyn and to implant Starmer as Labour leader. And this is £700,000 slush fund. The money came from a couple of pro-Israel donors to the Labour Party, Trevor Chin and Martin Taylor. Both what they were saying basically is they want to burn down the Labour Party with Corbyn and put Starmer in charge. So that was the book that came out tail end of last year, which really exposed the corruption that put Starmer in power. So this is, I think, in the background of the minds of many people scrutinising this, is that this is also criminal. You can't use a slush fund in order to replace a political leader of a political party. This is not allowed. And Morgan McSweeney's right in the middle of this, as of course is Mandelson is almost like the person that's brought McSweeney down by trying to use his influence within the Labour Party to get himself appointed ambassador.
What about the leaking of information to Epstein? Fairly serious issue, isn't it? I think it's under the Official Secrets Act.
Absolutely right. Yeah, it is. I mean, he should. I mean, if the Metropolitan Police were doing their job, Mandelson would have been arrested immediately. That was discovered. And I mean, these are very serious offences. I think they're normal in British politics, particularly with the Israeli influence. I noticed, by the way, that Reform UK have now set up their own Reform UK and Farage's Friends of Israel as well. But these are totally criminal organisations where you've got foreign influence taking over political parties. We've known for a long time this is the case with the Democrats and the Republicans in the USA, and the influence, Israeli influence, Mossad influence on American politics has been known about for a long time with AIPAC. But in the UK, it's relatively, I think, more recent that they've decided that the UK needs to have a similar thing. And all of these are criminal. So anyone that's taking money from a foreign power for political influence, who are an MP or anybody else basically involved in government. I mean, obviously MPs are not quite officially government; they're not in the government until they're in the cabinet. But anyone that's taking money from a foreign power, it's not good enough just to declare it, as particularly if there are political gains being made from it. So, I mean, for example, they can't take, if they're getting money from Israel, they can't take part in any decisions involving Israel. I mean, that's basically the law. But the law isn't really being enforced. These are all forms of misconduct in public office. And what Mandelson has committed by sending this information from the cabinet, as he obviously did, I think 3 separate issues now they've found through these files, is malfeasance. This is the most serious form of misconduct. It's deliberate misuse of political office, and that's the maximum sentence for that is life in prison. So why, I'd like to hear really yesterday that Mandelson has been arrested, that he's being interviewed by the Metropolitan Police, and maybe later in the week he will be charged, because it's quite obvious that he is a felon. And he's committed criminal offences most likely here. I don't think he's been charged yet, so I can say that. That's another bit of freedom of speech. This is all to do with court cases, what you can and can't say after someone's been charged. But that whole issue, I think, we should see that. If we don't see that, all it is compounding the cover-up. And also, of course, McSweeney's role. He has to be removed as the chief of staff for Starmer, and then it would be very difficult to see, because it's him that's been behind this complete misappointment of this guy as American ambassador. So the two of them, really, I think their fates are intertwined. The chief of staff, and then who's going to be next? Well, who would be a next Labour leader? Likely somebody like Wes Streeting, who's been positioning himself for it. And there have been people manoeuvring to make, it's almost as if everybody knows that Starmer is not going to make it into the next general election. And so they've been manoeuvring for months anyway. And so they're getting ready to take over. It wouldn't surprise me if this does bring down the Prime Minister, because it is such a serious issue. They're also talking about the KGB, by the way. I'm sure you've noticed that. The British press are saying, the KGB were funding...
I saw that.
I know, funding Epstein. No. This is just misinformation, disinformation, lies, whatever you want to call it, propaganda, to divert attention away from the fact that Ari Ben Menashe and others have pointed out, he's a former Mossad officer who's living in Canada, has pointed out the whole Epstein Maxwell operation, and it was mainly actually a Maxwell operation, who's still around. Epstein was disposable, and by the way, I do think he did die in New York. It was all being run by the Mossad and by the by the Israelis, and that's absolutely clear and obvious. And so that's embarrassing. So the London press is deliberately diverting people to point the finger at Putin. The KGB, they say, which by the way was disappeared in about 1990. So anyway, so this is another aspect of this: is they're desperately scrabbling to protect the Israel lobby in British politics.
I'm just wondering if because obviously they say that the Russians were involved. They've been watching a lot of, it was Dr. No. Did the suspects have gold teeth? I mean, but you got to have it. I mean, they got to have a bad Russian. I mean, it's probably bad MI6.
Well, it's a sign of desperation, I think, to try to convince people of this. There will be some. An old friend of mine, Manfred Petrich, used to say, "This is for the stupid people." So the idea is that everybody that knows what's going on immediately sees it and goes, "Oh God," raises their eyes to heaven. And a few people who just read the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and still trust these treacherous organisations, they may believe it, and they'll be talking to their friends down the pub. Did you know it was all Putin? Did you know about that? Oh, and by the way, the whole thing with Ukraine, I think, is, it basically seems to be being masterminded now by the Brits and being pushed by the Brits still. And this is an ancient and old struggle really going on here between the I guess what you might call almost like the Orthodox countries, the Orthodox Church countries, and the Catholic and the Protestant countries. It's almost like some sort of medieval battle going on. And I honestly don't think that is going to finish that war, because that the Brits and the West, NATO generally, are just hell bent on harassing Putin. They think they can bully him into submission, and they haven't quite realised that he's got far better weapons, and he's ready for a fight now.
Yeah, totally agree. It's my earpiece. Just wants to come out. I used to watch people on TV thinking, how unprofessional. This one has got a mind of its own.
Well, I don't have one, actually, I'm afraid.
No, you've probably got very sensitive hearing. I haven't. I need to hear the world. Tell me about this. Because I've read somewhere where Mandelson had an injury on his finger, and perhaps it was, I'm making this part up, but perhaps his favourite pastime or favourite exercise the last few weeks were delete.
Oh, yes, I think so. Well, look, I mean, these people believe that that the security services, intelligence services, etc., will cover their backsides. That's often the case for a long periods of time, because the role of organisations like MI5 and MI6 and GCHQ here in the UK now, a lot of it, they've convinced themselves in this sort of weird hypnosis that their main role is to protect the British economy, and that by suppressing dissent and all sorts of, I suppose, political civil society organisations like the environmental movements, that they've got to infiltrate them, control them, to protect the oil industry, the economy, or whoever it happens to be. So that seems to be their main role now. And of course, they're playing an important role in politics too by doing that, by controlling debate, discussion, shutting individuals down, closing down organisations, infiltrating, steering, destroying. I mean, if you think about the environmental movement that I was involved in, actually, in land occupations back in the 1990s, much of it was being actually controlled by special branch and the police. Quite clearly now, the police have decided we will infiltrate and steer these movements. And so, for example, a lot of stuff to do with getting rid of coal-fired power stations. If you look at the individuals who were actually running those campaigns, they were maybe the spokespeople. They weren't really running them, because at the meetings, which were being deciding where we go, what we do, how we provide transport for all these activists, etc., it was coppers doing it. So actually, much of the sort of net zero has been brought in by the police, and the close down of the coal-fired power stations is a police operation.
Yeah, and now you've got windmills. Those bloody windmills, can't stand them.
Well, they're okay. A few windmills are all right out in Wales and in the sea.
If you're a bird or a whale, I mean, as
steer
your
clear
numbers
of them. Steer
diminish,
clear of them. They're
and
okay,
a
really, but
bit
the
of,
thing
bit
is,
of coal.
thing is that
Oh, mate.
yes, coal is, I think, perfectly usable stuff.
It
But
is.
the main point of all of this was to really put the nuclear industry back onto its feet again, because it's so expensive. They want the nuclear stuff to go because it's very easy to automate. It produces loads of something called plutonium, which you can use in bombs, and this is all connected with the weapons industry, I think, and that's the main reason why they've gone for getting rid of coal.
I think people are over scared of uranium, and what's wrong with glowing in the dark? That's all I can say.
There is a guy called Dave Douglas here in the UK from the National Union of Mine Workers who's written a fantastic book all about how this climate change thing has been weaponized, and there is climate change, but it's been weaponized to destroy the coal industry. Basically, we had in the UK a fantastic coal and rail industry, which was all completely dismantled in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. To make way for a more sort of technocratic world. And also, of course, a big important part of all of that was to get rid of trade unions. We hate the trade. They did that, of course, with the print workers as well, to get rid of the unions, because this is a form of autonomous power the government can't necessarily control.
We could talk for ages, and I know you could, and that's more than I can do. Look, we have to wind it up here. I just wanted to, I had all these things, all these great one-liners for you too. I have to wait till next time, bugger. But anyway, look, if somebody wants to find out more about you, Tony, how do they do that?
Well, I do a weekly programme which is at thisweek.org.uk, the Bristol Politics Show. We do a bit of everything. So everything from the plight of the travellers here in Bristol, who they're trying to usher out of the city, the people that live in boats, they're trying to price them out, etc., to turn it into a very, very expensive place to live, and nobody's allowed to stay here unless they're paying at least like £2,500, £3,500 council tax, rent, etc. So a lot of the people on the margins of society are being ethnically cleansed, or should we say socially cleansed out of the city, all the way through to the sort of things we've been discussing, and also investigative journalism. I've been doing quite a lot recently on the Nazi origins of the 3 nuclear weapons which were used in 1945, the test, the 2 plutonium bombs and the 1 uranium bomb. It looks pretty certain now were actually built in Nazi Germany and used as a bargaining chip at the end of the Second World War. So these sorts of things we go into, also it's proper investigative stuff. And all I will say about the nukes is, look, the Germans actually split the atom in the 30s, and there was a big program going on there. And actually, it looks now, the guy to if people are interested in this one, in the meantime, before we speak next, then Todd Ryder in the United States has done some absolutely mind-blowing presentations going through the archives, etc. And what's not in the archives is one of the most fascinating aspects. Oh, this is missing. Why is that? This interview with this SS general that's supposed to have been dead in 1945. So this is the sort of stuff that I love getting my teeth into. A bit of trying to untangle some of the big lies of history.
Absolutely fantastic. And boy, can you talk. And I love it. So thank you very much for your time. We'll catch up with you. Hopefully you'll come back on again maybe next week. And we'll
thanks, Mike. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Tony Gosling here on The World Today. Thank you very much. A bit shorter today, folks, with the program. We had some not technical issues. We were fixing things up. Just a word that we are chipping each day, bit by bit, and we think that we will have some very good news very shortly. But we are talking about a chunk of change here, so it does take longer, doesn't it? But you never know. And then we can start some good stuff. That's it. Have a great, what day is it? Monday, Tuesday, great Wednesday. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is The World Today.